Congratulations, the spaceship is yours. The engineers are waiting, the launch schedule is set, and the world is watching. But nobody tells you what happens after you own a vehicle that can escape Earth's gravity. Cameras follow the fueling. Strangers memorize your name. For one countdown, you are the most famous person on the planet. Here's the thing nobody tells you. That fame burns off the instant the engines do. What you bought isn't a machine that flies once and photographs well. It's a liability that must fly again to earn its price back. You didn't just purchase a machine. You bought a ticket to one of humanity's most dangerous frontiers. The real conflict is this. A spaceship isn't a vehicle you own the way you own a car. It's a certification you're renting from regulators who can ground it at any time they choose. What you actually purchase is a machine that has to be re-qualified as flight-worthy after nearly every single flight, inspected component by component, before it's ever cleared to leave the ground again. You don't own the ability to fly. You own the paperwork trail that proves, flight by flight, that you're still allowed to, and that trail never stops needing renewal. That's the idea worth sitting with. The spacecraft is furniture. The certification is the actual asset, and it expires by default unless someone keeps paying to renew it. Entry into spaceship ownership happens in three real tiers. Tier 1, a single suborbital seat aboard an existing operator's vehicle, $450,000 to $1.25 million, buying you roughly 4 minutes of weightlessness and a view of the curve of the Earth before returning the same day. Tier 2, a chartered orbital mission aboard a private crew capsule, reportedly around $200 million for the entire flight, putting your own hand-picked crew in orbit for days at a time, with mission control, training, and recovery all included in that figure. Tier 3, the trophy tier. Your own private space station module, $2 to $3 billion, permanently crewed, permanently orbiting, and permanently carrying your name on the hatch for as long as it stays in orbit. That figure buys the module itself, life support systems rated for years of continuous use, and docking hardware compatible with at least one nation's resupply vehicles, without which the station is just an expensive, uninhabitable can. Ride that again. $2 to $3 billion, and the station still has to be resupplied every few months just to keep anyone alive on board at all. 3 tiers, 3 price points, and every single one hands you a machine that only stays useful as long as someone keeps signing off on it. The payoff here isn't ticket sales, and treating it that way sinks most programs early. It's research contract leverage. Government agencies and private labs paying to run experiments in microgravity that can't be replicated anywhere else on Earth. A single dedicated cargo resupply contract with a national space agency can run $150 million to $3 billion over its full multi-year term. That leverage, not the seat price paid by any individual passenger, is what actually keeps a spaceship program solvent long enough to fly a second time, let alone a 10th. A single suborbital ticket at $450,000 barely covers the fuel. A research contract measured in the hundreds of millions covers the company. Here's the burn rate, and it never quiets down between launches. Post-flight refurbishment and recertification on a single reusable spacecraft runs $10 to $25 million every time it lands, before it's ever cleared to fly again at all. Launch insurance alone typically costs 5 to 20% of the vehicle and payload's total value, meaning a single policy can run into the tens of millions of dollars for one flight. Add astronaut training programs priced at $250,000 to $1 million per crew member, and mission control staffing that runs another $20 to $40 million a year on top of that, and the total lands well past $100 million annually just to keep one program flying on schedule. Sounds like a lot. It is not enough. None of those costs shrink between launches, and a quiet month on the launch pad doesn't quiet the bill. The certification you're renting, described back in Act 3, is exactly what that 9-figure annual bill exists to keep current. Here's the trapdoor nobody sees coming. Informed consent liability waivers standing in for actual safety certification. Under current U.S. commercial spaceflight law, passengers fly under waivers acknowledging the risk of death, rather than under the kind of safety certification the FAA requires for ordinary commercial airliners. That means if something goes wrong, your legal exposure isn't capped the way an airline's would be, and a single fatal incident can trigger lawsuits, congressional hearings, and a multi-year grounding all at once, regardless of how many successful flights came before it and how much money those flights already made. The waiver protects the paperwork. It does nothing to protect the program's reputation, its investors, or its next launch license once regulators start asking questions in public. Here's where it gets interesting. The real value was never the spacecraft. It was the human rating certification behind it. Anyone with $2 to $3 billion can eventually build hardware capable of reaching orbit. Almost nobody can secure the years of flight test data and regulatory sign-off required to certify a vehicle safe enough to carry paying passengers, because that approval alone can take a decade or more of testing to earn from scratch. That certification is the secret engine, and it's the Exemption Act 2 promised without ever naming it. The hardware is replaceable, the certification is not, and it can't be purchased any faster no matter how much capital you throw at it. Regulators measure it in accumulated flight hours and failure data, not dollars, which is exactly why a well-funded newcomer can match the hardware in a year or two, but still needs a decade to match the paper trail behind it. In 2004, Virgin Galactic began development of a suborbital spaceplane, positioning itself as the first company to make private spaceflight a recurring commercial product rather than a one-off stunt. It eventually spent more than $1 billion over the following 19 years before flying its first paying customers in June of 2023. The company went public in 2019, and by February of 2021, its stock had pushed the company's market value to roughly $14 billion, almost entirely on the promise of imminent commercial flights, rather than any revenue actually being earned. Repeated technical delays and a fatal 2014 test flight crash had already cost the program years of lost time, and even after commercial service finally began, flights remained rare, and ticket prices rose from $250,000 to $450,000 per seat. By 2024, the stock had collapsed to under $1 a share, and the company's total market value had fallen below $500 million. The final number stated flat, a $14 billion valuation shrank to under $500 million in just 3 years. Here's how the ones who actually survive this long-term operate differently. They never treat the billion-dollar multi-decade certification bill the way Virgin Galactic did, as a cost to absorb once before flights finally begin. They treat rapid, repeated test flights as the fastest way to spread that same billion-dollar bill across dozens of missions instead of one long wait. The operators who kept their programs solvent flew test vehicles far more often and far sooner, turning years of expensive delay into months of cheaper iteration, and using that faster cadence to reach paying customers years before competitors stuck on the same certification timeline that stalled Virgin Galactic's $14 billion valuation. Every extra test flight cost real money up front, but it shaved months off the wait for a certification that would have cost far more to chase later once investors stopped believing the launch date. Here's the ultimate truth. You never owned a spaceship. You owned a certification that has to be re-earned nearly every time you want to use it. And the same regulators who granted it can pause it the moment anything goes wrong, for as long as they decide is necessary. That's not just true of spacecraft. It's true of every asset built on danger instead of ordinary scarcity. The paperwork is worth more than the machine underneath it, and paperwork can always be frozen by people who never sold you the machine in the first place. A $14 billion valuation and a $500 million collapse are both proof of exactly that same rule. Congratulations. The spaceship is still yours. But every flight from here on out is another certification you have to earn all over again, one landing at a time, for as long as the world keeps watching.